Mr. Colin Grabow is an associate director at the Cato Institute's Herbert A. Stiefel Center for Trade Policy Studies, where he researches domestic trade protectionism, including the Jones Act and the U.S. Sugar Program. His work has appeared in USA Today, The Hill, National Review, and the Wall Street Journal. He previously was a political and economic analyst for a Japanese-based trading and investment firm and researched U.S.-Asia relations at an international affairs consulting firm. He holds a BA from James Madison University and an MA from George Washington University. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Grabo. Um, Before we jump into the questions about protectionism and the Jones Act, what does your work at the Cato Institute usually involve, and how do you end up focusing on shipping and trade policy?
Yes. So, what's a day in the life here at Cato? Kind of how we spend our time. So today, I actually started my day by giving a briefing to some students from Kent State University about trade policy. Then I had an interview with 60 Minutes because they're considering doing a story on shipbuilding, and they want to get my take on some things. And then I put the finishing touches on an op-ed that I'm looking to publish about the European Union and Mercosur, which is a group of 5 South American countries, a trading bloc. They're going to sign a free trade agreement this weekend, and kind of talking about the implications of that and kind of contrasting that with the approach taken by the Trump administration. Um, then I had I gave a briefing about an hour ago to some folks from the U.S. military about the Jones Act, and now I'm doing this. And yeah, that kind of summarizes it. It's talking to folks. It's writing things, both op-eds as well as more deeply researched pieces, doing media from time to time, talking on podcasts, stuff like that. Basically, being out there evangelizing, advocating for the cause of free trade. As far as how I got into this, um, so I've been, as you mentioned, so I have an undergraduate degree from James Madison, where I studied international affairs. And after I graduated from college, I got the job working at an international affairs consulting firm. And then I went to grad school while I was there. And at first I was studying international affairs. Then I thought, you know what? I really enjoy stuff with a more of an econ component. So that's why I studied international trade. I just found myself reading books about trade and economics in my free time. That was really interesting. Um, and then, yeah, I got the opportunity to come here to Cato. I'm a longtime fan of Cato. I was reading their stuff even when I was in high school, I think, certainly in college. Always admired the Institute. And so, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to work here and be a professional libertarian and free trade advocate. And as far as, shipping, how I fell down this Jones Act rabbit hole. Um, Basically, so I started work here at Cato on September 25th, 2017. And I remember that date because it was just like 5 days after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. And it was fairly devastating. There was a lot of talk in the news at that time about the Jones Act as like an obstacle to providing aid to Puerto Rico and what an issue the law is for the island. And I wrote an op-ed, and then my boss asked me to do a deeper dive on it. So I started digging more into the Jones Act. And the more I dug in, I thought, this is absolutely crazy. Why are people running around with their hair on fire about this? And I thought, you know what? If no one else is going to talk about this law, then I'm going to talk about this law because it deserves to be talked about. More people should know about this because this is an absolute scandal. And yeah, it's just been kind of my personal obsession since then. Some people think that foreign shipping companies or shipyards are paying Cato to keep me occupied writing about the Jones Act, and there's zero truth to that. And then it's just this personal, obsession of mine. Now, I do other things. Again, I mentioned I just got through writing that op-ed about Mercosur and the EU, nothing to do with the Jones Act, but something I keep coming back to because I think it's crazy. I think it's very impactful. and more people deserve to know about. So I'm glad that you guys are also interested in this law.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great introduction and a great pathway to my next question. The bulk of this conversation is going to be about the Jones Act. And a lot of people in our audience don't know what the Jones Act is. So if you could give us a brief overview on what it is and what was it originally meant to do, like what was its original goal?
Yeah. So, what is the Jones Act? Where did it come from? What's the purpose? Yeah. So, the Jones Act is Section 27 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. And essentially means that if you want to transport goods by water within the United States, to say from LA to Hawaii, or just up even up the Mississippi River from New Orleans to St. Louis, whatever. You have to use a vessel that meets four conditions, and that is that it is registered in the United States. So just like you register your car in a state, you have to register your vessel in the United States as opposed to a foreign country. It can't have a foreign flag on it. It has to be at least 75% owned by American citizens. It has to be crewed by American citizens with a few limited exceptions. And it has to be built here in the United States. If you have a vessel that's crewed by Americans, owned by Americans, American flag, but it's built outside the United States, you cannot use that to transport goods in this country. Where did it come from? I mentioned it's part of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, so people might reasonably hear that and think, okay, so what, pre-1920, you could do whatever you wanted, use whatever ship you wanted. No. The Jones Act is basically understood as the latest iteration of very similar shipping restrictions that go back to the country's founding. In fact, in 1789, one of the first acts of Congress, they said, look, you can use a foreign ship to transport goods in the US, but if you use a foreign ship, you have to pay 50 cents per ton duty. Use an American ship, 6 cents per ton. And oh, by the way, the foreign ship has to pay that every single time they go to port. Americans pay that once a year. So you could use a foreign ship technically, but in reality, not so much. So you may also be reasonably thinking, okay, you're telling me the founding fathers thought this was a good idea, and you're not so high on it. How, those are pretty smart folks. How do you explain that? And I would just submit that the reality, like 2026, is a completely different world from 1789. Back then, American shipping and shipbuilding was some of the world's best, most competitive. Remember, these are the days of wooden ships. So you needed a lot of timber, forests to build these ships. The whole East Coast of the United States is one big forest, lots of, plentiful supplies of the raw materials to build this. 13 colonies are all along the water, lots of people that were skilled in shipbuilding. So building a ship in the U.S. is a lot cheaper than elsewhere. And in fact, something like 1/3, I think, of the British merchant fleet was built here in the U.S., or what, in the 13 colonies. But as time went on, that went away. By the mid 1800s, American shipping fell behind because we had the shift from ships made of wood and sail powered to those built out of iron and steam powered. And US built ships started to become significantly costlier than those built abroad. By the time the US Civil War, US built ships were typically like 25% costlier than foreign ones. So people started looking for ways around these laws. And they one workaround they found was, okay, so I have to use an American ship from an American port to American port. What if I go from an American port to a foreign port and then go from that foreign port back to another American port? Can I use a foreign ship? And you could. And so there was this court case in the late 1800s where someone tried to ship 250 kegs of nails from New York State to Southern California to Redondo, and they did it through Belgium. They took all the stuff in a foreign ship to Belgium, to Antwerp, loaded it to another foreign ship, sent it all the way to California. And the crazy thing is these guys did the math, and that made more sense than using an American ship. And the court ruled and said, yeah, as we read the law, you can do that. So Congress changed the law and said, no. It starts in the U.S., a U.S. port, finishes in a U.S. port, goes by water, it has to be an American ship. But they found another workaround, and this was shipping goods to and from the territory of Alaska. They said, okay, so I can't go over water to a foreign port. What if I go by land to a foreign port? So they would take goods up to British Columbia, up to Vancouver or Prince Rupert, and then put it onto a foreign ship and go to and from Alaska that way. Well, this made folks in Seattle, Washington really mad. They said this is unfair foreign competition. This should all be going on American ships through the port of Seattle. This isn't right. And then World War One comes along in 1917. The U.S. needs shipping to get all the men. Remember, no airplane, no jetliners back then. So all the soldiers and their supplies from the U.S. to France, and we don't have enough ships. So the government has to build hundreds of ships. They built like 2,000, ordered like 2,000 ships to be built. Well, the war ends and the government has all these ships on their hands. They go, what are we going to do with all these ships? We're not in the shipping business. We need to get these into private hands. So they decided, Senator Jones of Washington State decided to write this Merchant Marine Act that would get rid, dispose of the ships. And then while we're at it, address a whole range of maritime issues. So it had like 39 sections in, I think. Section 27 is the Jones Act. So the law gets passed in June of 1920. In February of that year, they're having hearings, and this guy named William Clark of the Pacific Steamship Company in Seattle shows up to testify and says, we got this problem with this unfair foreign shipping. And I think I got a solution here. I rewrote the law, and if you just adopt this language, that would solve our problem with the whole Alaska thing. And if you look at what he introduced, what he proposed, and what today we call the Jones Act, it's like 90% the same thing. So that's how we got the Jones Act. It is basically some lobbyists going to their senator, Senator Jones of Washington State, saying, please help us out with this problem. And the rest is history. So, yeah, sorry, that's a very long answer to a simple question, but that's where the Jones Act came from. That's kind of the backstory to it.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great overview, I think. Our audience definitely enjoyed it. Um, the Jones Act has seen a lot of criticism, yet it has been around for nearly a century. Why has it lasted for so long?
Yeah, so this is a story about the power of special interests. So and this isn't unique to the Jones Act. This is something we see crop up time and time again. And basically, you have a situation where there's a relatively small group of people that profit from the Jones Act. That these are going to be, say, for example, the shipbuilders. They this law says you got to buy what they make. They love it. Of course, they're going to support this law. And the ship operators, they don't want any foreign competition. And you have the guys that work on the ships, they don't want to face foreign competition. So they get to profit from the Jones Act. Meanwhile, your average American has no idea the Jones Act even exists. So these guys that profit from it, they are in DC all the time, talking to members of Congress, talking to their staff, saying, please keep this law in place. They claim, the argument they usually use is they say this is very important for our national security. That requirement that ships have to be built in the US. That means that we have shipyards that if a war breaks out, we can use those to build or repair ships, and that's important. And the law ensures that we have American ships that can transport supplies for our military in case a war breaks out. That's important. Um, and it ensures that we have mariners with the proper credentials to crew ships. That's, you want to be relying on a bunch of Filipinos or Chinese or who knows what to crew our ships. No, we need the Jones Act. So that's the argument that they make. So, basically, your average American doesn't know it exists. They're not incentivized to know that it exists. The people that profit from it, for them, this is the ball game. This is existential. This is everything. So they allocate their resources to ensuring it stays in place. And so you end up having a very asymmetrical situation where I can name you off the top of my head probably at least like 7 organizations that either, if not number one, issues one, two, or one of their top 3 issues is making sure the Jones Act stays in place. Like the Shipbuilders Council of America, duh. You've got the maritime unions. You got the Lake Carriers Association. This is folks that operate on the Great Lakes. You've got the American Waterway Operators, that an organization of folks that operate on our rivers, um, and coastal inland waters. You've got the American Maritime Partnership. This is a group. Literally, the only reason it exists is to keep the Jones Act in place. There is no 2, 3, 4 issue. That's the only reason they exist. Without the Jones Act, they would be pointless. Um, and there is no countervailing group that is dedicated to getting rid of the Jones Act, that's out there employing lobbyists and donating appropriately. So we're talking about the Jones Act, but this is just a good lesson for you. Anytime you see something, you think, why is that the way it is? That is so screwed up. Why don't they just change the law or whatever? Some variation of this dynamic that I just described to you, I guarantee you, is in place. Like you mentioned in your introduction of me, that I also work on the U.S. sugar program. And for those not familiar, this is a program that restricts imports of sugar to benefit American sugar farmers, to make sure, and processors, to make sure they get top dollar for their sugar. So American sugar costs like 2 or 3 times what it does in the rest of the world. This is why Coca-Cola, unless you buy Mexican Coke, it doesn't have sugar in it. It has high fructose corn syrup. It's because we restrict sugar and we subsidize corn production in the U.S. So, the reason we don't get rid of this is, again, because you have a very dedicated group of people that want to make sure this law stays in place. Your average American has no idea that this law even exists. So you can just find this. We're talking about the Jones Act, but you find it over and over and over again. So we call it dispersed costs and concentrated benefits. Small group people profit. Your average American, they get hit, but not by a life-altering amount of money. In the case of sugar program, like $50 per year, you probably pay extra for that. But each person's paying $50, and there's 200 or how what is the U.S. population? Over 330 million people. That's a lot of money. You're doing pretty well. So yeah, that's basically the dynamic.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that answer. You mentioned in your answer that many argue that the Jones Act protects American maritime jobs and strengthens national security. Based on evidence, does it actually reach the goal?
Yeah. So again, the argument is it gives us shipyards and shipbuilding, it gives us ships, and it gives us mariners. So let's evaluate each one of those. So start off with shipbuilding. Um, in 2024, the most recent year for which we have data, the United States, which is the world's second largest manufacturing country, was ranked 19th in the world in terms of shipbuilding. We accounted for 0.04% of global shipbuilding output. We haven't built an ocean-going cargo ship in this country since 2023. So as of this summer, it'll be 3 years since we've even built a single ship, commercial ship. So we're not talking about the Navy or Coast Guard or stuff like that. And that's 1 year, but if you look back over the last 5 years, I think the US is like number 15 in the world, and we average like 0.15%, something like that. So it's really hard to make the case that we have this robust shipbuilding industry. And meanwhile, we're behind folks like Singapore, Norway, the Netherlands, much smaller countries than us, that are developed countries, with good wages, stuff like that. So it's hard to make the case that, from my perspective at least, that this is a success. Then in terms of the fleet, yeah, it's true. You do need ships to transport supplies for the military. But U.S., I should back up a bit. We should also ask the question, so why don't we build more ships? Well, it's because we're so uncompetitive. A U.S. built tanker costs, a small tanker estimates. We haven't built one since 2017, so we don't know exactly, but there are different estimates out there. I think a reasonable estimate is about $220 million to build one. Over in Asia, they cost about $50 million. So $170 million difference in costs. The last Jones Act ship built cost $225 million. That similar size ship was built the same year in South Korea for $41 million. Right now, there are three Jones Act ships being built up in Philadelphia that cost $334 million apiece. These are extraordinary numbers. So this is why no one wants to buy from Americans, because we're so out of whack in terms of competitiveness. So then, in getting back to the size of the fleet, is forcing Americans to pay outrageous amounts of money for new ships a really smart, productive, effective way of trying to promote a large fleet of ships? Don't think so. I think it's actually quite counterproductive. So right now, the Jones Act fleet, in terms of ocean-going ships, which is the kind of vessel used for transporting sea lift for our military, it's 92 ships. The global population of ships is like 40,000. This is 92 ships to meet the needs of the world's largest economy. And we don't just live in a large economy in terms of GDP, but just think about how big the United States is. I mean, this is a country that stretches from Guam to Maine, from the Aleutian Islands to Puerto Rico, big distances. That lends itself to water transport. We have places like Hawaii, Alaska. You can only really ship to with boats or with aircraft. We have all kinds of major cities along our coasts. We have thousands of miles of coastline. We have the Great Lakes. Just 92 ships. Like only 2% of what we move in this country goes by ship. In terms of all water transportation, so barges and everything, we're at like 9%. Less than 10% of what we ship, because we've made what should be a very cost-effective way of transporting goods. We've made it just like an option of last resort. So anyway, it's not good, I think, in terms of promoting the growth of the fleet. Back in the 1950s, we had like over 400 ships in the domestic fleet. Now we're less than 100. And then in terms of mariners, well, again, you got fewer ships. That means you have fewer mariners. And back in 2017, the government did a study and looked at, okay, in time of war, how many mariners do we need and how many do we have? Well, there was a gap. There were like 1,800 mariners short of what they need. And they said that was like a best case scenario. The actual numbers, if a war would break out, would probably be worse. So it's very hard for me to look at this and saying, yeah, this is working. This is good policy. We should keep doing that. I think if this isn't failure, exactly how bad would things have to get before we go, okay, now it's a failure. Now, how much worse do things have to get before we, I think, just speak the truth and say that this law has not worked out?
Yep, thank you for the answer. I think it gives a really good overview on how the Jones Act has failed American citizens. Moving on to my last question before I pass it on to Ani. Who ends up bearing the real costs of these shipping restrictions? Are these costs spread across consumers in the United States or concentrated in places like Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and Alaska? And I've also heard that sugar comes up as a concrete example in Jones Act debates, especially in Puerto Rico. How exactly does the Jones Act end up making it cheaper to import foreign sugar than ship US sugar domestically? And what does that tell us about the broader economic effects of this law?
Yeah, so you're right. We all bear the cost of the Jones Act, but it's disproportionately felt in the shipping dependent locales in the United States, places like Guam, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico. Um, so, but let's not make the mistake of thinking that the rest of us it's a non-issue. Um, it's mostly understood as an opportunity cost. Like, yeah, probably very little of what I buy comes by ship within the United States. It all goes by truck or rail. But that's just again because we've made shipping so costly. We've basically taken it off the table as a method for transporting goods. So let's try to imagine, because the cost of the Jones Act is not okay. Shipping a good to Hawaii costs $10,000 per container, and without the Jones Act, it would cost $2,000. Therefore, that $8,000 per container, that's kind of the cost of the Jones Act. No, the cost of the Jones Act is what does the United States look like with the Jones Act in place versus what does the United States look like without the Jones Act in place. And the world, try to imagine this post-Jones Act utopia. What does that look like? What differences do you see? Well, I think, for example, we would see fewer goods being transported by trucks going up and down our coast. Instead, we'd shift cargo out to water transport. So goods going from, say, Texas to Massachusetts, instead of going by truck or rail, we can imagine that they would go by water. Right now, there are literally zero ships that go up and down the East Coast or go from the Gulf Coast to the East Coast. None. Um, I should say there are some tankers that go from the Gulf Coast to Florida because there are no pipelines that go to Florida. So basically, ship is your only option. Um, and yes, it would not be, so I don't want to create the impression that everything, all of a sudden there'd be no more trucks on the road and that everything would go by ship. No, certain things that truck is probably ideal for, certain things rail is ideal for, and certain things ships are good for. Um, but we have, again, basically no shipping. So, give you a more concrete example. Look at the steel industry. So, right now, there are two ways of making steel. One way is you use iron ore, another way is use scrap metal. So iron ore are produced, steel plants that use iron ore are predominantly found around the Great Lakes region, the Rust Belt, say like Ohio, Indiana, places like that. And the way it works is the iron ore gets loaded on ships in Minnesota and then it goes to the steel plant. Well, without the Jones Act, you would have cheaper shipping, more efficient shipping. Most of those ships in the Great Lakes, there's only been one built in the last 40 years. So this is not the latest and greatest. They have one of those ships that was built in World War II they're using up there. So this is not the most modern, efficient fleet in the world. Without the Jones Act, that would become cheaper. That would bolster the competitiveness of our steel industry. And then think about it. Then you have the auto industry that uses that steel, knock-on effects for them. And then, in terms of scrap metal, back in the 90s, some executives testified. They said it was cheaper to send scrap metal from the United States to China than it was to send it to another US port. I mean, it's crazy. So you can imagine, again, that we could supply American steel mills with domestic scrap metal more cost effectively. This is just one industry I'm talking about here that would benefit, and these would have knock-on effects because ultimately this is about transportation, and transportation affects everything. We're all dependent on transportation. In the specific example of Puerto Rico, I don't know about sugar per se. I know about agricultural products. We've seen examples like there was a study done by the US government back in 2013 about the Jones Act's impact on Puerto Rico. And the Puerto Rican Farm Bureau mentioned things like buying like corn and potatoes and animal feed and fertilizer from foreign sources instead of from the US mainland because they said, look, after you factor in the cost of transportation, it doesn't make sense to buy American. So we buy foreign because of the cost of the Jones Act. And I know that back in 2012, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York did a study on Puerto Rico's economy, and it mentioned that at the time, to send a container from the East Coast to San Juan, Puerto Rico, cost a little over $3,000. But to send that exact same container to the Dominican Republic or Jamaica was between $1,500 to $1,600, roughly half as much. So that's a doubling of the shipping costs, and this is over 10 years ago. Since then, that delta, that difference in price between foreign and Jones Act has only further increased. So this is basically a tax that the people of Puerto Rico are paying. The people of Puerto Rico, who last I checked, have a poverty rate of 40%, and we're subjecting them to some of the world's most expensive shipping. So, what are we doing here? Um,
Yeah, thanks for the answer. I think it was a very in-depth answer in terms of the implications of the Jones Act to Puerto Rico and other territories. I'm going to pass it on to Anirudh. He has some questions as well.
okay,
So you can take it on.
thanks.
Hi, thank you again for meeting with us. You mentioned a lot about the criticism of the Jones Act and the evidence, but many argue, some argue that the Jones Act protects American maritime jobs, and
Mhm.
it strengthens national security, and it like creates resilience and creates self-sufficiency in the American maritime industry. How do you actually measure whether a policy like the Jones Act actually makes the United States more resilient?
Yeah, so I guess I'd like to ask those folks, by what metrics are they using to make that case? Because oftentimes I hear like these very general statements, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm like, well, we're down to 92 ships. Exactly at what point do you say yes? Yeah, is the case for the Jones Act falsifiable? What standard do we evaluate against? Do we evaluate this against? Because I've never heard Jones Act supporters make that case or say, yes, the standard is this, and therefore we can evaluate. Does it meet that goal or not? Again, we're at 0.04% of shipbuilding. At what point does it become a failure? How low do things have to get? What, 0.01? Is that where we say, okay, now it's a failure? Um, but in terms of resilience, I find this argument especially laughable for a few reasons. One is that I suspect if I were to steel man the case for the Jones, I'd say something like, okay, look, you're right. I mean, we do pay a little bit extra because of the Jones Act, but hey, and those ships cost 300 million or whatever, but maybe it's worth paying a little bit extra so we have that ability to build our own ships, so we're not reliant on foreigners in times of war. Who knows if they'll be there for us? We need to be able to count on ourselves, and if that means we pay a little more, then we pay a little more. Except the reality is we are totally dependent on foreigners for our shipbuilding needs. So ships have to be US built. US built, what does that mean? What's the definition of US built? Well, it means that the ship has to be entirely assembled in the United States, and the hull and the superstructure have to be fabricated here. But what that also means is that like all the stuff that goes in the ship, like the engine, the propeller, all the stuff, it can be imported from abroad. And in fact, I know there's a quote from a shipyard executive a few years ago, and he said, "Look, there's about 1 million parts and components in a ship, and over half of that is imported." The last U.S. built ship that was delivered in 2023, the propeller was from China. The engine is Korean. Like all these critical, among the major machinery, literally none of it was American. Um, I was told yesterday that currently the Philadelphia shipyard is building some training ships for the U.S. For U.S. maritime academies, including Cal Maritime, and the shipyard is Korean owned. The ship was designed in Korea. The ship was in the news because they have some problems with their engine, like the shaft or whatever isn't working. There's some malfunction. It was installed at the shipyard by Korean technicians flown in from Korea. The actual relevant part was built in Sweden. And then we say, this is all about American resilience and national security. And thank God we're not dependent on foreigners. I mean, who are we kidding here? We're 100% dependent on foreigners. Another thing I'd point out is that let's say a war broke out. God forbid. I hope that doesn't happen. But this notion that, hey, it's cool. We can use these shipyards, build some ships, and we're good. You don't snap your fingers and ships appear out of thin air. And US built ships, the last one delivered in 2023, it was ordered in 2017. So we're talking, 4 or 5 years, best case scenario is like 2 or 3 years. So this idea that a war breaks out, hang on, guys, give us a sec, we're gonna go build some ships and get back to you. It better be a long war for this to factor in. To me, better approach is, how about we have a bunch of ships from the get-go? That sounds like a superior approach. And then in terms of resilience, so some people think that there's a school of thought we need to reshore, we need to do things here, so we're dependent on ourselves. Well, that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is that's kind of the putting all your eggs in one basket strategy. When you are able to turn to allies that produce things, it means you have optionality. It means you have different sources of supply, redundancy. So things go bad in one place. Hey, that's okay. I got a backup plan. I think those are things worth considering. And then as far as jobs, well, again, are mariners well served by paying out the nose for new ships? Is that a great way of encouraging a thriving domestic maritime industry? I mean, to me, the evidence suggests, in terms of the maritime jobs, this is not a big winner. And furthermore, why should we privilege maritime jobs above the rest of the economy? What about everyone else out there? You go, hey, Puerto Rico, yeah, you guys are poverty. I get it, but sorry, these guys over here need some jobs, so just suck it up. Unless someone can make a really good case for why these guys, and it is mostly men, uh, deserve, these special privileges, I don't get it. Now, all that said, there are legitimate national security needs that need to be met. We do need ships to be able to transport supplies for our military in times of war. The question before us is, what's the best, most cost-effective, efficient way of doing that? The answer is not the Jones Act. Like, if right now we have a subsidy program called the Maritime Security Program, and it gives $5.3 million a year to 60 US flagged ships. And it basically says, we give you this money, and in exchange for that money, if a war breaks out, we can grab your ship. That's fine with me. There's a cost is very transparent. We know what it costs. We know what you get. $5.3 million, one ship. You can evaluate whether that makes sense or not. People smarter than me, like at the Pentagon, go, yes, this is good. And so I don't oppose giving the military what they need. They should absolutely have what they need. I just oppose to the failed nature of this policy and just the gross inefficiency that it entails.
Thank you for that perspective. I think that really clarified a lot of things for our listeners. When people talk about like the Jones Act, like you said, they often treat it as one specific policy, but like the requirement has like four specific parts, as you mentioned. Which part, like being U.S. built, U.S. owned, U.S. crewed, or U.S. flagged, do you think does the most economic damage both to our economy and the economies of other nations, and which is the most defensible?
Yeah, I think the U.S. build requirement is by far the most damaging element to this. Again, maybe there'd be a compelling point to say, well, on the one hand, we're paying more, but look at this awesome shipbuilding industry we have, a thriving, vibrant shipbuilding industry. We're building next to nothing, and we're paying out, the nose for ships, these obscene prices, 5 times the world price for a new ship. And which is harmful, I mean, just from an economic perspective. But even if you just care about the maritime industry itself, why you wouldn't want that? I mean, if we were starting from scratch today and said, okay, brand new maritime law, new cabotage law, what should it look like? How many people would say, yes, we should require it be built here in the United States? Literally no other country does. I mean, maybe North Korea does that or something, but no other country I'm aware of has this requirement. We don't even do that for any other form of transportation. We don't do that for air transportation, for trucking, for rolling stock, for cars, anything else. We only do it if you floats. So that would just be kind of harmonizing the Jones Act with the rest of our laws. Would be getting rid of that. That's an excellent place to start. As far as what is most defensible, I guess you could say the U.S. flag requirement, because the U.S. ownership really doesn't make any sense. If for no other reason than if you have like a publicly held company kind of evaluating who the stockholders are, just even evaluating, do you comply with this 75% rule? And why is that the magical cutoff? Why 75? Why not 60? Why not another number? I've never heard a good argument for that. So I think that's questionable as well. U.S. crew requirement is, I think, fairly defensible. But we should, if, like here at the Cato Institute, we have foreigners that work here. So in lots of American industries, you can work there. So I think we should, at the very least, ease it up so that if there's a qualified foreigner and they're willing to work for an American company, you should be able to hire them.
Okay, thank you. That was a very um succinct justification. If repealing the Act outright isn't super realistic, What incremental reforms do you think would actually make a meaningful difference? And is there any one change that you think would deliver the largest payoff?
Yeah, I think the build requirement would be that would deliver substantial payoff. I think you'd think it's common sense because again, like what are we really protecting here? We have almost no industry left. We've protected it into the grave almost. And you'd think at some point people would wake up. Now, let me go a little bit of a tangent here. So you might reasonably think, okay, well, yeah, why do we still have that? I mean, if for no other reason, you got to think the Jones Act shipping companies themselves, they hate paying a lot of money for new ships. They would have an interest in getting rid of that requirement. And the mariners, I mean, obviously what do they get out of it? They should also want to see this go away. So the reason it doesn't go away is it's not just the shipyards, the ship operators, they love it because it's a moat against competition. If you cut if you said, okay, instead of paying $300 million for a ship, you get one for $50 million, well, all of a sudden, a lot more people can get in the game and challenge you and compete with you. But right now, it's like, oh, you want to compete with me? Yeah, you go pay, $300 million for a new ship. And then if it doesn't work out for you and you got to sell that ship, well, good luck. Because if you got to sell that in the international market, you're going to get 20 cents on the dollar for it. So it's a barrier to competition. And also those guys paid a ton of money for their ships, and they're like, wait a minute, I'm going to have to pay all this money, and then you're going to let someone come compete with me that has much lower capital costs? Like, nuh-uh. So that's why that doesn't go away. But in terms of other kind of commonsensical reforms or more modest reforms, well short of repeal, we should also have a waiver system. Let's say I want to move something from one part of the United States to another. I'm willing to use an American ship, but there are none that exist. Then you should be able to use a foreign ship, because again, if there's no American ship, that means we're protecting nothing. Nothing is being protected here. So I'll give you a case for that. New England imports liquefied natural gas from overseas. Why? Why don't they just get it from an American source? Because there are literally zero US built, US flagged LNG tankers. So we are the world's leading exporter of LNG. We ship it all over the world, like 30 some countries. We can't send it to other parts of our own country because of the Jones Act. That's crazy. Hawaii imports liquefied petroleum gas, which is propane and butane, from West Africa instead of from Texas, even though we're one of the world's leading exporters of it, because there are no ships that qualify under the Jones Act to transport it. This is nonsense. So that's a win-win for Americans. Zero harm to the maritime industry because this is not a service they offer, so they're not losing anything. And this is a win for American consumers. They get lower costs. American energy companies, they get a win. That seems to be super obvious and commonsensical. The problem with that is that Jones Act supporters, they fight literally any and all changes because they don't want the precedent for a tweak. They are very much invested in having this perception of the Jones Act as impenetrable. Like basically, don't even try. You're going to fail. Do not try to change this law. Because if someone gets a win and the Jones Act gets tweaked, then other people go, oh, wait, we can change the Jones Act? Oh my God. I need, or if people start getting insight, they go, yeah, I had all these costs and they made this change. So now I can buy like American energy and my costs are going so down. Then other people are like, hey, I want in on that. I want some lower costs too. And they don't want the camel's nose in the tent. So that's why even getting very, very modest reforms is such an uphill battle.
Thank you. Um, you mentioned a lot of the domestic um shipping issues that come from the Jones Act. But the Jones Act also seems to have many international spillovers. How does it affect US competitiveness compared to countries like China and South Korea that dominate global shipbuilding? Does it end up weakening the US position in the very industries that it claims to protect?
Yeah, well, I think it's very hard just if we narrowly look at the maritime industry or the shipbuilding industry to look at this and go, Yeah, this is working out. We're in a better place today than we would be without it. Because really, to think that the Jones Act puts us in a better place is you would have to think that without it, we produce like literally nothing. Like instead of 0.04% or 0.1%, we're at 0.0%, which I absolutely struggle with that. You're telling me that the world's again we're a manufacturing powerhouse. We're in a country renowned for its inventiveness, its competitiveness. We're very much have a maritime disposition. Again, thousands of miles of coastline, home to tens of millions of Americans and big cities. And we look at commercial shipping and go, yeah, we give up. We have nothing to offer here. We're competitive in autos, we're competitive in aerospace, all kinds of other forms of transportation, but we have nothing to offer shipbuilding. I don't believe it. I think that, it's pretty axiomatic that if you protect an industry from competition and say, you've got a captive market, don't worry about the foreigners. They can't sell their stuff here. This is all you. If you don't have to compete, you're not going to be competitive. I think competition is what drives companies to be better. I don't think Apple invents the latest version of the iPhone every year because out of the goodness of their heart. It's because they think they're going to get their lunches eaten if they don't step it up. They don't bring their A game every day to the table. Also, beyond competitiveness or just that the pressure of competition, the way that other countries are able to compete in shipbuilding is they don't take the U.S. approach where they say, "Yeah, we're gonna build everything." They say, "No, we're gonna take like one type of vessel. We're gonna get really good at it." Like Turkey is extremely good at building fishing vessels. And these are not little dinky ships. I mean, these can cost, $50 million. These are technologically very sophisticated vessels. And they're really good at it because they just like, we're going to focus on one thing and be the best. Or you look at the Netherlands, traditionally has been very good at dredgers. The Finns have built something like 60% of all the icebreakers in the world. Korea has built like 80% of the world's LNG tankers. They find a niche and they sell to the world market. And in the US, we kind of like a jack of trade, master of none. We build small volumes all across the board. We're not particularly good at any of them. And that's a product of having a captive market. So I think we've done ourselves a real disfavor with the Jones Act. Again, it's hard for me to look at the kind of production numbers we're talking about and going, yes, this is a success. And I firmly believe that if we'd gone back to, say, the 1800s, never had this in the first place, that today we would be in a better place. I'm not going to say we'd be a world beater, but I think the bar has been set so low, it would really be hard not to improve on it without the Jones Act.
Thank you so much. I'd like to pass it on to Kayvon, one of our directors. He has a question for you.
Okay.
Sure. So I'm kind of wondering about how critical of a military failure is the weakness of the American merchant fleet, and how does it really fit into the context of, say, Russia and China, who are known to sponsor and support larger ghost fleets for their own shipping?
Yeah. So the question is, yeah, how critical is the merchant marine or having a commercial industry for national security? I do think it's necessary, but I think it gets exaggerated because the case for the fleet is, again, in times of war, that we have these cargo ships at the ready, crewed by Americans that can transport goods. But we also there's a whole fleet, several dozen cargo ships owned by the U.S. government. So it's not as though we rely 100% on commercial ships for that. So I do think there is a need, and there is some added security in time of war, knowing that having American mariners are probably a little more committed to the cause than someone from another country might be. But again, I do think it gets exaggerated, blown a little out of proportion. The military regularly uses foreign ships to transport supplies for it. So they don't seem to be all that concerned about foreign shipping. And at least in peacetime, they're happy to do it. So again, I guess I come back to the place I land is let's go to the Pentagon and say, how many ships do you need? Okay, let's pay for it, and it comes out of your budget. So you got to really ask yourself, is this worth it to me? You got to put your money where your mouth is, and if it's really worth it, then they should subsidize it accordingly to pay for it. And what I just totally reject is this approach where we require that you have to use American ships. How much does it cost us? We don't know. We don't know. How many ships does it get us? Well, again, I told you there are 92 ships, but that doesn't mean if a war breaks out that all those 92 ships are available. Because if for no other reason, some of them are like LNG tankers that have no military utility, or they're little vessels that haul frozen fish. I don't think that's probably going to be all that important. So I think the very fact that we can't do a cost benefit analysis of the Jones Act, how can you have good public policy if you don't know what it costs, you don't know exactly what you're getting for it? And unless you can do that, I just think you've come to a bad place.
Thank you. That wraps up the prepared questions that we had for you, Mr. Grabow. I'm now opening it up to the audience. Does anyone have a question for Mr. Grabow? Anything that he discussed or any other topics that you'd like to discuss?
Is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Well, hello, Mr. Grabow. I hope you remember me from the Coolidge Cup. I was part of
Yes, 100%. Yes, I think I have a photo. We have a photo together.
Yes, we do. So I'm definitely not someone who's pro Jones Act. Definitely deviate a lot from
I hear a butt coming.
your good friend, Mr. McCown. But I'm wondering when it comes to like the shipbuilding industry, well, I guess this kind of stems into two main questions. But if 95% of domestic shipbuilding revenue comes from government contracts, why do you think that the industry is still so resistant to any change, knowing that they would still have that government guaranteed revenue? And then second of all, stemming from that, when it comes to unions, how do you think that the government can properly adjust their policy or adjust any reform for the Jones Act to recognize and kind of mitigate the effects that the union reaction would bring?
Yes. So in terms of the shipbuilding, and I think basically your question is, hey, this is very much the game is all, the vast majority of revenue comes from the government anyway. This is not Jones Act revenue where they're making their bucks. Why do they care so much? So yeah, I think as of 2019, which is the most recent year for which I'm aware, there's data. I think government contracts accounted for a little bit less than 80% of industry revenue. So, if you want to make money in the shipbuilding industry, it's building for the Coast Guard, the Navy, stuff like that. That's where the money is to be had. So why is the industry so committed to this? I think it's because they don't want to set the precedent that it's okay to buy foreign, because those government contracts are also subject to U.S. build requirements, not under the Jones Act, but a separate set of laws. So again, they don't want the camel's nose in the tent, and there's really no reason for them to give up on it. Like, okay, so it's only 20%, but still, why would I give up 1% of my revenue? I suspect is the way that they see it. As far as the unions, there is a deal to be had here with the unions where you say, guys, look, here's the deal. We get rid of the US build requirement, and you guys are going to have more ships to work on. You're going to have newer ships to work on. You're not going to be stuck working on 30-year-old pieces of crap. You're going to have a new modern fleet. That should appeal to you, new, safer ships. The issue with unions is that they think that their alliance with the shipyards is that I got your back and you got mine. And their theory of the case is that if we make even a modest change to the Jones Act, like getting rid of the build requirement, that is just going to be step one toward the law is eventually disillusion, and that where the end of the road is that the law gets scrapped entirely, and they don't have any ships to work on because no one wants to hire Americans. That's the way they see it. I think the truth is actually probably the opposite, in that if we got rid of the build requirement, that would take this gap between US and foreign costs. It would go from like here to like here. There'd still be a gap, but it'd be much reduced. And I think you'd hear a lot fewer people complaining about the Jones Act. It's just like with, I mean, how often do you come across people arguing for removal of airline cabotage laws and letting foreign airlines into the US market? I mean, look, as a free market libertarian, I'm all for it. But you don't hear nearly as much complaint about airline industry and lack of foreign competition as you do in the shipping industry, because the costs are so completely out of whack. So I think they'd be ultimately be doing themselves a favor in the long term as well. And then the last thing I'll point out is that there's been a trend towards automation in the industry for a long time. It used to be that a ship required like 50 people to crew it. Now we're down to 20-ish, 23, something like that. There are moves, just like you see self-driving cars, there's autonomous shipping taking place. Now, these tend to be, smaller vessels, not big ocean-going ships. But, the labor component of it, I suspect, I don't know if we'll ever get to like, huge cargo ships with nobody on board, but I do suspect there'll be more automation, and the role of labor in driving costs will diminish somewhat as time goes on.
Thank you.
And with that, our time has ended with with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Grabow. It's an honor talking to you.